peace of Christ be with you. This is the Midweek Reflection for Third Reformed on December 23rd, and it is the last Midweek Reflection of 2020. I couldn't imagine all that this year would bring when I did the first one of these way back in March. That first week of the shutdown, I talked about the great pause and ways in which we might envision this pandemic experience as an opportunity to step back and to reevaluate where our lives are at, what our priorities are, what values we really want to build our lives upon, and then what kind of commitments and patterns of life we're going to help sustain that. It seems kind of fitting that the last midweek reflection of 2020 would therefore be the last week of Advent, when the church is traditionally focused on the virtue of love. I can't think of a better guiding principle to build your life around. As I've said before, including here in the midweek reflections, love is one of the most abused and neglected terms in our English language. Sometimes I wonder if it has been cheapened to the point of disrepair. But we have no choice but to take it back up every once in a while and try to invest it with the depth of meaning that Scripture gives it, because truly love is the central virtue of Scripture. We are told that God Himself is love. And when Jesus was pressed on what the most important commandment is, He said it's the twofold one of loving God with all that we have and loving our neighbor as ourselves. At the end of this video, there will once again be a link to the Bible Project with their Bible word study for love. And they, again, do a great job with that Greek term agape, which is more than just fleeting emotions or feelings one may have. And it speaks instead about the pattern of our lives, the way we show up and relate to God, to people, to the world around us. Agape love is about giving when there's nothing to receive in return, about sacrificially placing the needs of others above our own. And when I think about this year that we've gone through and the ways in which we've struggled up against this twofold commandment, some of our struggle as a church has been around loving God, because we have not been able to gather and worship in the ways we're used to, or to grow in discipleship and learning in the ways that we have in the past. Maybe for you, some of the adversity you face this year has raised some questions or doubts about your relationship with God in ways that you haven't experienced before. But I think there's another huge part of what we've struggled with, which is losing some of the ability to love our neighbors as ourselves in concrete, tangible ways. The church's missional activity in the world has been put on hold as well. I was thinking about that a couple weeks ago when we had a Feeding America food truck here in the parking lot on a Saturday morning. We partnered with St. Mark's Episcopal to pull that off and provide some relief for families that are struggling with food security right now. And we especially focused in on the families of East Leonard Elementary School, one of our core partner organizations in the community. And it was a good opportunity to be able to do something that had us outdoors and socially distanced and masked and all the things that you need to do to stay safe right now. But I was overwhelmed with joy as I looked at God's people in action, filling boxes with food and handing them out with smiling eyes behind a mask, even if you couldn't see smiling mouths. There is something so good and right and unifying about engaging in the love of neighbor in practical ways. And for me, when I look forward to the year ahead, it's where I find myself getting excited. You'll see in the weekly update this week that there's going to be a 6-week sermon series coming in January and February called the Missio Dei, which which is a Latin term meaning the sending of God, but it talks about God's mission of restoration for all things within God's creation, and humanity's sending out to partner with God in that work. So this week, whatever your Christmas celebrations look like, I pray that you would find joy in them, that your love of God would grow as you remember once again God's deep and unfailing love for you, that the hope and peace and joy and love of this season would fill your hearts. And then I pray that as we move into this new year, that love of God would spring up in new and powerful ways for you into love of neighbor, care for those on the margins, an extension of grace to those who are far from God or from the fellowship of God's family right now. Because it's that missional activity that really reminds us what we exist for in this world, and that binds us together as a community of faith, not just growing in our knowledge and love of God, but growing in our ability to love our neighbors well. Because, church, there is a lot of work left out ahead of us, a lot of suffering and loss in our community that will extend into this new year. So on this final week of Advent, and as we prepare once again to receive the gift of the coming of Christ, I pray that it is the love of God that will fill your heart and shape your life in the year to come. Merry Christmas.